Good afternoon, College of Education. Welcome to our guests and participants who are joining us on the third webinar session on developing faculty peer facilitators for InFLeX modality training. This training is brought to you by the Mindanao State University, Iligan Institute of Technology College of Education, in collaboration with the Better Universities and Knowledge for All project, co-funded by the Erasmus Plus. We would like to welcome all of you to our training participants, along with the rest of the faculty and teaching staff of the college and our other participating guests. We are very fortunate to have with us a very experienced online and distance learning teacher, facilitator, and tutor who will be our speaker in a later while. Before we formally start, I would like to present a few reminders for our training this afternoon. First, today's link for attendance will be provided in the Google Meet chat and the YouTube Live comment section. For those of us present in the Google Meet, make sure that you are in a place with no distractions and have your microphones muted. To minimize data traffic and consumption, we request that you turn off your videos unless requested. During the lecture, we request that our Google Meet participants refrain from chatting questions and comments. Instead, please reserve them for the forum that will follow right after the lecture. Finally, to get your certificate of attendance for today's session, please accomplish the evaluation link shortly before the end of the session. At this point, I know that everyone is ready to learn more and connect the dots since our day one of the webinar. To formally start, may I request everyone to stand for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem and for a short prayer.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw, pero sa sinakanan, alam ng puso, sa dikit mo'y bumay. Lupang pinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manluluping, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit mong bagaw, ay hinatang tulakawin sa pagkayang minamahal. Ang isang ng katawan mo'y tagumpay na nagtitindig, makituwin at araw niya kailan ang ay makikinig. Lumanang araw ng warhagit pagsikap, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang inigaya ng pagkay mga amin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Once again, good afternoon and welcome to the third webinar session of the training Developing Faculty Peer Facilitators for Innovative and Flexible Learning Modality. As a form of review, our first session was conducted last January 12, 2021 with Dr. Hannah Terras, who shared to us the principles and ideas on how to engage our students and learners by deliberately enhancing our learning designs. Last January 29, 2021, Dr. Wim van Petegem also shared how we may maintain the integrity of assessment in the pandemic era, and he shared the overarching goal of assessment and a good number of strategies how to do it online. Today, we will continue with the topic on how we can support our students and establish communities of learning in our respective classes and programs, now that we are in the second term of implementation of the innovative and flexible online and distance learning. Our speaker is Assistant Professor at the Faculty of Education, University of the Philippines, Open University. And before she went on study leave, she handled courses in chemistry and science education, as well as CWTS courses. At the Faculty of Education, her research interests include innovations and pedagogical practices in chemistry education, especially enhancing teaching and learning chemistry through technology and learning analytics. Her research advocates include the efficient use of open educational resources for teaching and learning in science education. Her previous administrative duties at the Faculty of Education led her to pursue her interests in finding ways to provide support to distance education students at both the academic and administrative levels. Our speaker completed her Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Chemistry at UP Los Baños. She is a licensed chemist and a former faculty member at the Institute of Chemistry in UP-LB. She is currently on study leave as she completes her doctoral program in chemistry education at the School of Chemistry, Monash University. Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker, Assistant Professor Charisse Reyes.
Thank you. Thank you po, Prof. Jonil and Dr. Buwan for the invitation. Pasensya na po kayo, medyo kinakabahan ako ng konti. I'm very pleased to share with you some of the insights I gained after 7 years of teaching here, teaching back at UPOE. So I'm just presenting my slide. Hopefully, okay naman po. So nakikita naman po ninyo yung slide ko.
Yes, Charisse.
Okay. Thank you po. So currently, I'm overseas. I'm here at Clayton campus, and before I begin, it is customary here in Australia to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we stand. So today, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land I am presenting today here at Monash Clayton. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So I am on my second year of completing my PhD and hopefully finish soon. But some of my work I will include in this talk. So for this afternoon sa Pilipinas po, ahead po kami ng 3 oras dito sa Clayton. I hope to present to you and share with you some insights with regard to providing student support, which I personally based on some relevant theories. And from there, I'll provide you with some insights as to what competencies will be required of our teachers to provide this kind of student support to our students. And finally, I'll present to you some form of advice with regard to promoting the 4 pillars of supporting students in online and remote teaching environment. I understand that prior to last year, we are you are all accustomed to having a physical classroom wherein the teacher and the student and the content are all confined in four corners of a physical classroom. Hanggang mangyari yung pandemic, then we all urgently shifted to a virtual classroom. There's no longer common space for the teacher, the student, and the content to have an interaction during the teaching and learning process. In this way, I think nobody was prepared for whatever happened since last year. And the shift from the traditional face-to-face teaching to the virtual classroom came as a surprise for many of the teachers, especially in higher ed. So that was the year, that was 2020. It was significant for me as well because I was looking back at when everything happened, I came to a reflection on what I did when I shifted. So sinabi ni Professor Junil kanina na I taught at the Institute of Chemistry for 9 years, face-to-face sa UP Los Baños. And then after the first 9 years of teaching traditionally, I shifted drastically to an online mode. Pero ang difference kasi nung sa akin sa nangyari sa karamihan ng mga teachers sa Pilipinas at sa ibang parts pa ng mundo is that when it happened to me 8 years ago, I was aware I was doing that. And so I had 2 months of preparation. I know what I'm going in. I know what I'm putting myself into. I was very much aware and informed of the things that will change. Apparently, that was not the case for many of the teachers across the globe last year. So, wala silang ganong mental preparation and emotional preparation to, accept the fact that, yeah, this is something that's going to happen to me. So we understand that for most of you, it was difficult. Kasi ako personally, nung time na yon, mahirap na siya. Lalo pa siguro kung urgent yung need, di po ba? So, bigla ang nangyari kasi. So, naiintindihan namin because many of the institutions, academic institutions, reached out to us, me and my colleagues, and of course UPOU, and they sought for some form of assistance to help them navigate through the transition from the traditional face-to-face to an online modality. So parang we had to put ourselves in their shoes so that we can properly provide them the necessary support they need. And one of the things that actually they need is how to navigate the transition, not just in the curricular aspect of it, but also for our students, because if you are transitioning to that modality, our students are as well going through the same transition. And while the journeys may not be the same for both teachers and learners, the outcome needs to be the same, that everybody become accustomed to a foreign or a new mode of teaching and learning. So the wide spectrum, so everybody, both students, teachers, and the institution had to traverse the wide spectrum of the face-to-face traditional mode of teaching to the fully distance online mode of delivery. And if you are considering student support, we have to acknowledge the type of learners that we have, primarily because we are giving this support for them to be more successful in their academics. Hindi sila yung primary concern, which means that whatever support you provide, the major consideration is the type of learners that you have. And in an online and remote learning environment, the diversity of our learners become more pronounced. It's less pronounced during traditional mode. Kasi parang pag pumasok ka ng classroom, nakita mo lahat sila nakaupo, nakatingin sa'yo, parang feeling mo, okay, so pantay-pantay na tong mga to. Unless may estudyante ka na magulo, hindi siya nakikinig sa'yo or lumilipad yung isip niya, pero karamihan ng students natin, pagpasok natin, they pay attention to us at least for 1 or 2 minutes. At least at that moment, you know that they are at the same level. When you do online teaching, it's not easy to assume the same. It's much better to assume that our students are different and unique, and that they have different that there are differences in context, background, culture, language. All of those will become pronounced, and all of them will become pronounced in their transactions and in the activities that they will perform as they go through the teaching and learning process. I'm sure you all know this because you are from the College of Education and you are trained teachers. Minsan nga iniisip ko, hindi ako sure kung tama bang ako yung na-invite nyo kasi hindi ako teacher. I wasn't trained to become a teacher. I am a trained chemist, but it's the experience that I had in teaching, both for traditional and for online teaching, is the only thing that I can be proud of. Pero hindi po ako trained. Even now, when it comes to learning theories and everything, nag-i-struggle pa din. Anyway, so I hope you understand kung merong lapses later. Anyway, we all know that in a remote and online teaching environment, our students, there are certain criteria that will allow our students to succeed that may not be the same as the criteria we require of them in a traditional setting. So students tend to succeed in a remote and online learning environment if they are able to, number one, navigate the technology or whatever medium you are delivering your learning materials. If they are able to develop the skills for self-regulated learning, self-efficacy, and learner autonomy, provided given that the setting is fully distanced and that there is no immediate teacher presence or social presence to rely on. So the first layer of support will come from themselves. So we have to be able to teach our students to gain these skills of self-regulated learning, self-efficacy, and autonomy. The third requirement is that they should be able to interact with the learning environment in meaningful ways. So, ito yung isa sa mga peak ng difficulties is for us to ensure that they are having meaningful experiences interacting with the learning materials that we provide. And it's not easy to assess in a distance mode, or at least it's not easy to see. Because, of course, in traditional mode, it's also not easy to assess this level of meaning in terms of interaction. Also, we hope that our students will be able to actively engage in academic materials with the instructors or with their peers. Based on these desirable student characteristics, we hope to provide them the support they need so that they will reach this level of requirements. Ito yung gusto nating mabuo sa kanila. Therefore, ito sana yung mga, therefore, these should be the types of student support that we provide them. So how then could we provide our students the support they need to succeed in a remote and online environment? The perspective that I will present to you today will be based on the following. So, what kind of student support system should we establish for our students to succeed in this kind of environment? Number one, that support system should be able to accommodate our diverse learners in terms of their context, their needs, and learning preferences, which is not easy to begin with. So that requirement for pedagogical support should be put in place to ensure that our learning materials will be more inclusive than not. to a wider range of types of students. These types of student support should also be systematic. When I say systematic, it has to be established at this institutional level. So while ourselves as teachers, we can provide student support at our level, there has to be something higher than us that's organized in terms of student support. Student support, hindi lang nanggagaling sa atin bilang teacher, nangangailangan din yan ng mas malaki pang organization. Say your college or your university should be able to organize a systematic institutional student support system across all levels, from the course level up to the university level. The student support system should also be reliable and evolving. So it has to be present constantly, but it should also be able to adapt according to the needs of the students or the situation, especially that in online learning and that technology keeps on advancing every now and then. The kind of student support that we provide should be able to evolve from time to time. So katulad na lang yung nangyari last year, syempre hindi kami masyadong nagpanic, pero meron pa ring impact yun sa amin. Kahit na for the longest time we deliver our courses fully distance, our students were still impacted by the adverse scenario that happened last year. So some of them lost jobs, some of them had family members who fell ill. So these kinds of situations arose last year, and those were not part of the original student support system that we had. So we had to evolve little by little until all of the problems that we encountered last year were addressed. Finally, these student support systems should be put up front and should always be active, contrary to being passive. So anong ibig sabihin nun? It is something that we provide our students the moment they are admitted into our programs. Hindi yan yung itatanong nila sa atin kung ano po bang meron kayo, hindi ganun. Dapat upfront, pagpasok nila sa ating mga programs, academic programs, we now offer them, these are the services that we provide you. So nakalista na agad yun sa kanila. They are already informed that they are already informed of a list of available resources and services at their disposal anytime they need to. So the kind of student support that I envision and I tried to implement when I was the faculty secretary at the Faculty of Education were based on 4 theories. I know that you are very familiar to these learning theories. So dadaanan na lang po natin. Gusto ko lang po i-emphasize is that whatever framework, whatever support system you provide your students, they have to be based on a certain framework. Ganun siya dapat ka-organized. Ganun siya dapat ka-systematic. Hindi dahil feeling mo dapat may ganito, ibibigay mo na. O gusto namin ng orientation kada semester. Bakit mo ba gustong gawin yung orientation? Kailangan ba yun ng students? What benefits will they gain from it? So whatever you do, there has to be a construct or a framework that supports those steps. Bakit? Kasi you want putting up a student support system in a remote and online learning environment is financially draining and taxing on the part of those who organize it. Mahirap, malaki siyang initiative. And you will see why based on the theories. So we begin with the TPAC framework, the Technological Pedagogical Content Knowledge. And the reason why we begin with this is because the medium of instruction for many of those who shifted to remote and online learning is through online modality. And having the online component in your modality already requires you to understand the complexity of the interplay of different knowledge of 3 concepts. Pasensya na po kayo, nagdidim po yung lights namin after 7 o'clock, so kailangan gumalaw ako. Anyway, yun. Anyway, so um, yeah, so we have to understand the complex interplay of different knowledge of three concepts. Those are the technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge. And to get to reach to an effective teaching with technology, there has to be an effective combination of the technological pedagogical content knowledge, or the TPCK. Um, Note, however, that uh, this does not apply to all in all contexts in online learning. Ang sinasabi lang is that hopefully we combine all of these components, the TP and CK, so that we can deliver our courses with technology with the highest efficiency as possible. That's the first. The second one is the theory of transactional distance. And because we are operating in an online mode, the teacher and the student are not confined within the same physical area. There is already separation between teacher and learner, and that separation is significant enough that requires a special teaching and learning strategies to be implemented. So, ano ba yung sinasabi ng transactional distance? So, transactional distance is basically a result of either a physical or temporal distance, differences in physical space or differences in time, and it results in psychological or communicative space, which separates the instructor or the teacher from the learner in the transaction between them. So dahil nagtuturo tayo, yung iba siguro synchronous, yung iba asynchronous, the difference in the time of delivery and the time of receipt of instruction already creates that transactional distance. And this diagram basically says that we hope that there is minimal transactional distance in an online environment. That's our goal, is to minimize the transactional distance by either providing a structured instructional material. So you provide a highly structured instructional material that will allow the greatest learner autonomy, or we provide a huge amount of dialogue between the teacher and the students. So as students and teachers speak or communicate with each other, the transactional distance is being reduced. As we provide better, more structured learning materials, the transactional distance is also reduced. All of this will result in greater learner autonomy on the side of our student. So if you provide them a highly structured learning material as a form of support, then they can do it by themselves, di ba? Yun yung assumption natin. The third theory is of course, the community of inquiry. So this community of inquiry posits that learning occurs through the interaction of three presences: the cognitive presence, the social presence, and the teaching presence. Basically, the COI framework is representing a process of creating a deep, meaningful learning experience. However, we have to emphasize that the COI framework requires a collaborative and constructivist learning environment. There is no COI or community of inquiry formed in the absence of a collaborative or constructivist environment. Yun yung number one assumption ng framework na ito. So in this framework, it basically just highlights the interaction between the cognitive presence, which is basically the ability of the members of the community, that includes the teacher and the students, to construct meaning through sustained communication. So it is important that all members of the community, that is the teacher and the student, they will sustain communication lines so that the cognitive presence is maintained. The second requirement is that the members of the community should be able to project themselves in to promote social presence. So they should be able to express themselves. There has to be an avenue for socialization, in short. And finally, there has to be a very strong teaching presence in a community of inquiry. The teaching presence is basically manifested by the designer and the facilitation of the educational experience. So while we are not present physically in our virtual classrooms and we don't see our students, our teacher presence is not diminished. So yung iba kasi iniisip, hindi na kasi kami nakakapagturo, hindi namin sila nakikita. So hindi na, para kami hindi nagtuturo. In fact, during teaching in a remote or online environment, our teacher presence is just shifting in terms of its appearance. Feeling ko nga mas nahirapan akong magturo nung nag-online teaching ako, mas kailangan kong maging magaling na teacher kaysa nung nagtuturo ako sa UP Los Baños. Kasi sa UP Los Baños, kung gusto ko lang mag-i-impress yung mga estudyante ko, tatayo lang ako sa harap. Matangkad po ako 5'8 ako. 5'8 ako, tatayo lang ako sa harapan, tapos ipapakita ko lang sa kanila yung height ko and the authority that I have. And then mag-show lang ako. It's like giving them a show, basically. Magiging artista lang ako. I'll just pretend to be a good teacher by giving them, standing there and making myself look like I'm a good teacher. So that's very easy. That was one way of getting my students impressed by me. So, ang tawag po sa akin ng mga estudyante dati ay legend sa analytical chem. Pero ano lang po yun, show, para lang makikinig sila sa akin. Pagdating sa online teaching, hindi na po yun applicable. Una, they don't see my height. They don't see the authority I have when I stand. Wala na yun. Everything in terms of teaching is now confined in a course package. So the teacher presence becomes, I think, my teacher presence became more prominent when I taught in the online mode. Although it was difficult to achieve that level of teacher presence. It took a lot of training and studying at the Faculty of Education. Anyway, the last theory is the theory of 3 types of interactions, or the theorem of equivalency. So basically, what this theory says is that there should be 3 interactions present in an online learning environment. Those are the student content, the student-teacher, and the teacher-content interactions. Now, the question is, do I have to have all of those 3 interactions? The logical answer is yes, you have to have all of them. However, some of them may be at the high level, that's acceptable, and some of them may be at the low level. What's important is that as much as possible, there is some form of student-student, student content, and student-teacher interaction. So, nevertheless, if you put this in an online environment, it's not easy to promote the student-teacher interaction, because we don't, unless you do synchronous teaching once a week, it's not easy to promote student-teacher interaction. We can compensate for whatever is lacking in student-teacher interaction by providing good learning materials that will allow maximum and optimal student content interaction. So basically, this theorem of equivalency suggests that while you don't need all of them at the high level, you should at least have one low level for each and one at the highest level. So the concept of this equivalency will allow your students the deepest and most meaningful learning experience, as long as one of them is at the high level and of very good quality. I remember on my second semester of teaching at UPOU, there was one semester wherein my student is a graduating best student, Bachelor of Education Studies that time. He was the first to graduate from the program, so obviously he was the first to progress in several courses. And in so many instances, there's only one of him in most classes. So nagkataon yung isang class na punta sa akin na siya lang yung estudyante. I learned about my assignment on that course several months prior to the assignment. So I prepared, study guide, course pack, thinking that I have 20 students. So meron akong discussion forum kasi sabi nung dean namin noon, ang discussion forum daw nagpo-promote ng student-student interaction. And if you participate in the discussion forum, you promote the student-teacher interaction. So I made activities such as discussion forum. Come the semester, I only have one student. Sabi nung dean, walang sense yung discussion forum mo, kasi isa lang siya. Are you gonna talk to him every now and then just to maintain the student-teacher interaction? Convert all of these activities, all discussion forum activities, into something that will become, that will promote student content interaction instead. So I had very low student-teacher interaction during that semester. I had zero student-student interaction kasi mag-isa lang po siya. So I had to compensate for a student content interaction. So that kind of pedagogical support had to be done immediately in that semester. So as an online teacher, isa-summarize ko lang po that what is required of us is that we reduce the transactional distance. That's number one. So find ways to reduce the transactional distance. Second is to facilitate and manage the cognitive, social, and teaching presences. Third is to promote the student interactions with the content, their peers, and their teachers. So at the course level, these are the types of student support systems that we should establish for our students. Now, will the teachers be ready to provide these support systems? What do we require of these teachers? So for them to be able to provide this kind of student support, they have to be, number one, content experts, syempre. Yun yung number one requirement, that you have to be content experts. Number two, that you have skills that are able to facilitate administrative transactions. So number three, technological competence. Otherwise, you won't be able to perform the teaching in terms of technology, enabled teaching and learning processes because you don't know. So number one requirement din po yan, technological competence. Of course, communication skills and responsiveness is another requirement. You should also be knowledgeable in instructional and learning design. The next one is that there has to be a provision for informative feedback for our students. You should also be able to monitor learning and progress, which is sometimes mapapakunot noo ka na lang na parang hindi ko alam paano ko sila imo-monitor. So I recently did a survey to chemistry teachers in universities, and this is one of the prominent feedback that I received from that survey, that they don't know how to know. They have no idea whether their students are learning or what. So if you are not able to do all of this, how can you do student support at the course level? So medyo mabigat yung requirement kung tutuusin po. Pero hindi naman po laging ganon. Hindi naman everyday ganon yung gagawin mo. Although parang feeling ko, everyday, yun yung ginagawa nating lahat. Ano po? Anyway. So it is important to note that teachers' critical roles in terms of student support actually shift within the duration of the teaching and learning process. So for the whole semester, you have different roles every day. And actually, that's kind of tiring for us teachers. Sa totoo lang po, nakakapagod yan kung titingnan natin siya na tayo lang yung gagawa. It is important to note that the shift is not linear. So sometimes, however you organize your calendar or your activities, the emails keep coming and from one email to another, there are different concerns. So, nasisira kahit yung sarili mong pagpaplano dahil hindi linear yung change ng role mo. So, it is important to note that when we require our teachers to provide student support, they have to have the following minimum competencies for them to be able to become ready or prepared as provider of student support at the course level. So, ito lang naman po yung ilan sa mga reported literature when it comes to online teacher readiness and core competencies to provide student support. Anyway, so, kung natapos niyo po yung CHED seminar, CHED webinar ng UPOU, I'm sure familiar na kayo dun sa 4 pillars to supporting student success. Basically, these 4 pillars aim to minimize the barriers to students' engagement in learning. That's number 1. Second is to ensure a rewarding and meaningful learning experience for your students. The third is to maximize student success and reduce attrition. I would be very happy to see if the attrition rate is not huge for many of the universities who shifted online. Kasi kami, ang attrition rate namin, dapat nga, siguro retention rate na lang yung sabihin ko. Our retention rate is 10%. Based on my studies several years ago, I found out that only 11% of our students complete our programs, undergraduate programs. So it will be very interesting to see how the attrition rates of universities who shifted to online teaching changed or if they remained. Kasi isa to sa mga malalaking studies when it comes to online and distance education, attrition and retention rates. And in providing student support, we hope that we reduce the risk of attrition of our students and promote their success. So the first pillar to this framework is the provision for pedagogical or academic support. For me personally, this is the most crucial, most critical support that we could provide our students. And the main goal for providing this is to make them autonomous or to promote their learner autonomy. So they should be able to learn on their own with minimum supervision, physical supervision from us or face-to-face supervision from us. That's the goal in online and remote teaching. At the institutional level, we can do this by providing resources that promote academic success. Ang number 1 po dyan ay academic advising. When I entered UPOU 8 years ago, this is one thing that I was surprised to see. All students, regardless of whether you're graduate or undergrad, go through an advising process. Pagpasok mo sa program, pagka-admit sa'yo, you will know your program chair, and the program chair will provide you the overview of the whole program. 1:1 po yung interaction nito, hindi to yung general orientation. So there's a 1:1 email correspondence between the student and the teacher that orients the student into the program, the requirements of the program, the mode of delivery, the different services that we provide. So imagine if you have 60 new students and you have to provide this kind of service to them. If it is just the teacher or the program chair doing this, it will be very exhausting. And every enrollment, we do the same for all students. So for the continuing students. Kasi dumadaan sila sa amin bago ang enrollment. Kumbaga yung enrollment nila ina-approve ng program advisor or program chair. It is important for us to do that to ensure that our students are on track or are enrolling the correct courses. So, kasi hindi naman sila pare-pareho ng progress. I had one batch, say 100 students, 10% of them are on track, 90% of them are have varying progress. So from those enrolling 25% of the suggested to 75% of the suggested units. So hindi hindi sila pare-pareho. Pagdating ng susunod na semester, that creates a domino effect in terms of their academic progress and of course in advising. So it's important that the institution, say the college or the university, should provide these program advisors the necessary support they need to be able to ensure that the students are on the right track of their program. So on several occasions, you can also provide orientation services to ease the students into their curricular integration, especially the new students. Kasi kung freshman yan, tapos papasok sa online teaching, iba yung expectation niya dun sa high school pagdating sa college. And there had been several studies that actually proves or shows that the transition from secondary to tertiary contributes to high attrition rate. So most freshman students are struggling in that transition, and in the absence of a peer or a teacher that they can immediately consult with, that adds to the attrition rate, to the attrition rate. Anyway, so we also provide them instructional and library resources upfront. So that's just a few of the institutional level that we can. That's a few of the student support systems that we can provide at the institutional level. At the course level, there's a more intimate interaction between the teacher and the student when it comes to student support. And sometimes the demand for the teacher is much heavier. So we have to be able to provide support so that there will be ample opportunities for student-teacher interaction and student-content interaction. So sabi ni Prof. Jonil kanina, meron na kayong training webinar for enhancing learning design for remote teaching or online teaching, and that actually adds to this aspect. So your knowledge of learning design actually promotes the student content interaction. So ang goal lang naman dito is that we provide our students the quality, inclusive, and accessible online learning resources to accommodate different contexts, needs, and preferences of our students. So nowadays, yung issue ng inclusion saka accessibility ay isa sa mga malalaking concern pagdating sa tertiary education. So isa yan sa mga tinitingnan ngayon. The second advice is for us to make sure we provide our students the appropriate feedback. I put important as a term to emphasize how significant the feedback is. Take note that our students do not see us. They actually can't ask us whether or not they're doing great. They have to gauge themselves whether or not they are progressing in the course. So we have to provide avenues for them to self-assess themselves. And one form of that is the feedback mechanism. Aminado naman yung mga taga-OU na isa to sa struggles namin, yung mag-provide ng immediate feedback. Kasi kung meron kang 200 na estudyante tapos essay yung quiz mo, paano mo makomentan yung 200 na assignments sa loob ng 2 linggo kung 500-word essay yung pinagawa mo sa kanila? So these are the things that our maybe administrators could look at while we as teachers wish to provide student support. Sometimes we have to make it also possible for them to do so. So, for example, the institution could provide us with more tutors to help us mark the assignment and to manage the smaller subsections of our classes So ang tawag doon ay kung meron kang faculty in charge for the whole class, you have recit classes or sectionings, and each one will be assigned a tutor, and the tutor will take care of the immediate feedback mechanism. Unfortunately po kasi sa OU, nag-offer kami ng 34 academic programs, graduate and undergraduate programs, pero 30 lang po kami. So all other teaching duties, we heavily rely on affiliates and adjuncts, and Dr. Buwan is one of those generous people who help us in the delivery of our courses, and we are very thankful for that. So the mechanism of providing feedback, while it is very important for our students' progress, it is also important that we look on the institutional level on how to facilitate the same feedback mechanism to aid our teachers. Anyway, so ano ba yung characteristics ng feedback? Number one, it has to be timely, it has to be constructive, and there has to be learning scaffolds. So we should provide assessment methodologies that will promote assessment for learning. Our assessments and our feedback will support the learning process. Basically, that's the point. So ang example ko po dito ay yung an example of pedagogical support is the following. So meron akong isang open educational resource na ginagamit sa klase ko. Hindi ko lang binibigay basta yung link. Kailangan bibigyan mo siya ng curation, saka ng annotation. This is one form of providing student support in the level of the course. You don't give the link lang. You have to describe the resource. You have to describe what you want the students to do with the resource. So there has to be a complete description of everything, so that at the end of the description, the students will know what to do because you already provided all the information. So, feeling ko nga minsan there's no such thing as too much description when it comes to giving annotation to resources. You provide as many possible description. The second support that we should provide is, of course, the technological scaffolding. Technological scaffolding, ibig sabihin, we are helping our students navigate the technology, especially the medium of instruction. So while the first pillar is the most critical, this one is actually the most immediate, because the first interaction our students do in a virtual classroom is to get into the virtual classroom. So we have to provide necessary support so that our students will be prepared for the learning process in a remote or online environment. We have to make sure our students are ready for the online learning prior to the actual learning. So sa UPOU po, meron kaming online learning readiness module. All students go through the module before enrollment. So it is a requirement for enrollment and admission. So students go through the online learning readiness module so that they will have a feel of how it is to become an online learner. Unfortunately, last year, I don't think the universities and several academic institutions were able to prepare the students. After all, no one was prepared anyway. So maybe in the coming semesters, we are hoping that these institutions will recognize the need for assessing readiness for our students. So it is also important that we provide user-friendly virtual learning environment for our students. I'd like to emphasize na singular yung virtual learning environment across an institution. Yun sana yung ideal. Pero syempre, from one teacher to another, sometimes they would prefer that whatever is convenient for both the student and the teacher, or whatever is accessible for either party, yun yung gagawin nila. Pero mahalaga din po sanang, ako usually in my webinars, I emphasize that we wish that for every institution, there's only one common virtual learning environment. Bakit? Kasi kung si Teacher A, estudyante niya itong batang ito, tapos si Teacher B, estudyante niya din yun. Tapos si Teacher A tsaka si Teacher B, magkaiba sila ng virtual learning environment. So the student has to navigate two different virtual learning environments. So it is important that at the institutional level, there is uniformity in terms of prescribed virtual learning environment across all programs within one institution. This is to help our students manage the difficulties in terms of navigating the learning, the virtual learning environment. We also have to establish an accessible and flexible online learning modality. Although we expect our students to be techie and tech savvy, quote unquote, pagdating sa learning environment, iba yung kanilang attitude. Yes, they can do Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of these social media platforms. But the information dissemination that they need inside the virtual learning environment is not necessarily the same as the skills they use for navigating the social media platform. So we have to give them the necessary training to be able to navigate the virtual learning environment. Kasi hindi, akala natin bilang teacher, mas magaling pa nga sa akin sa technology yung batang yan, so kaya niya na yan. Baka hindi po, baka mali yung assumption. And actually, I saw that in my study here. This has become one section of my PhD because I just stumbled upon that observation. So I did blended learning. So I did online learning in 2019 at the Institute of Chemistry. I implemented an online learning modality for 2 weeks to freshman students. And you can see from this heat map that the first 7 days, there was minimal activities as shown by more blue. So this heat map indicates that the bluer color says minimal activities. The more activities in the learning environment is indicated by the yellow or orange color. So the first 7 days, there was minimal activity. And we account this for the fact that this is the first time most students have been exposed to online learning and to the learning management system, which was Moodle. So even if 3 days have already passed, they are still, clicking this and that wrongly. And they were not able to successfully perform any activities. Kaya masyadong mababa yung movement nila sa LMS yung first 7 days. Pero after 7 days, on the second week, there's an observed increase in the activity inside the LMS. Well, bukod sa due na yung mga quizzes, due na yung mga assignments, natuto na kasi silang maggamit ng LMS. So this observation basically points out a significant insight that we have to allow our students to become familiar with the new learning environment. Yun nga lang, gaano ba katagal yung allowance na yon? Yun po siguro yung kailangan nating pag-isipan. At dun sa allowed period na yon, we have to provide the necessary technological support by providing user manuals, addressing common issues on logging in and accessing learning materials and activities, as well as pedagogical support. So, dapat, dun sa first 2 weeks ng klase kada semester, hindi ka magbubuhos ng napakaraming assignment, napakaraming readings, napakaraming quizzes. Wag muna yon. Siguro naman makakaantay yung mga heavy learning activities towards the end. So, we allow our students to acclimatize in the new learning environment. That's a very important aspect of providing support. The third one is to provide support for health and well-being. There is a perceived isolation, the perceived feeling of isolation for our students in the blended, in an online mode. And this is something that we should worry about as teachers and as administrators, because we have to help our students transition to the new learning environment. Dun papasok yung academic advising. So when advisors or administrators somehow introduce themselves and inform the students that we are here to provide this and that, that actually gives a feeling of security to some extent to our students to feel that they are not alone in this journey. It also helps them ease the pressure. We also need to help them ease the pressures of academic achievement by promoting positive mental health, mindfulness, and well-being. Medyo sensitive yung topic ng mental health concerns for the past year, especially since there's diminished social interaction among friends and among peers. So halos walang avenue for relief of stress yung mga students except their parents or their yung mga kasama nila sa bahay. So maybe it's high time that most academic institutions are encouraged to establish counseling services that are conducted virtually, or at least we provide them career or self-help services just so they can, manage their stress more properly. There is also a need for institutionalizing administrative services for students. So dito pumapasok yung mga transactional services ng students from registration to graduation, and automating these services or giving them access to online versions of everything somehow relieves the tension of not being able to accomplish the administrative processes because the transactions are limited. And lastly, there is a need to provide a sense of community to promote social welfare, social aspect of your students, as well as their sense of belongingness. And at the course level, we can do this by providing avenues for student-student interactions, by giving them learning activities such as discussion forums or rooms for social conversations just among themselves. So, ang ginagawa ko sa klase nito, meron akong isang discussion forum na bahala kayo, magchika-chika kayo dyan or tanungan kayo kung kailangan nyo ng help. I just make sure that they are observing proper etiquette in dealing with their other classmates to avoid any conflict in the future. So, yung iba kasi po ay online bashers din naman paminsan-minsan. So, yun yung mga iniiwasan natin for any room that we provide them just for themselves. Hindi tayo makikialam. So, you just give them the guidelines on how to properly present themselves in an online environment. And usually it works naman. Finally, you can create an atmosphere that encourages engagement among teachers and students. So, ang mga example ko nito ay email me anytime, basta don't expect a response anytime. So, baka kasi masanay din silang mag-email sa'yo ng 2:00, although nagtatrabaho pa naman siguro, yung iba po nagtatrabaho pa hanggang 4:00 ng madaling araw, pero mali po na mag-email sila at mag-expect ng sagot in 5 minutes. So usually we provide guidelines in terms of sending emails. Pero yun nga, when they send emails, we have to acknowledge and respond to these emails. Otherwise, that will create another level of mental stress and anxiety on their part. Yun. And finally, the provision for student support at different levels in the university aims to look for ways to enhance teaching and learning experience in an online learning environment through inclusive and equitable services for our students. Whenever we see a problem of our students, we have to ask ourselves, what else can we do? And in an online learning environment, sometimes doing much is not even enough for some of our students, not because we're doing less than they need, but we might not be giving them the right one. So it's not easy and straightforward to navigate on which type of student support to give to all of these students. It takes a lot of experience, at the same time, empathy. So usually yun yung primary value that we should always possess for our students, empathy and patience. Maraming salamat po. Yun. Do you have questions?
Thank you so much, Professor Charisse, for a very comprehensive presentation and giving us relevant illustrations and examples for each pillar of support. Ako personally, I'm still navigating on those pillars of support, and I'm thankful that you gave us very relevant examples po on your experience. So I would now ask and encourage our participants to raise questions, comments, clarifications. Uh, Professor Charisse will entertain them. Do we also have, sir, sa YouTube Live? Wala pa. All right. So anyone would like to start the ball rolling? Oh, Professor Charisse, you have something to say?
Yeah. Basta, don't be hard on yourself. Siguro yun yung isang takeaway. I know this is heavy for all of us, but don't be hard on yourself because limited lang yung kaya nating gawin. Kaya nga mahalaga yung collective effort eh. Kasi you might be doing something good, pero pag pinagsama nyo yung inyo, best pa yung kaya nyong gawin. So, it's important. Kaya when we talk about student support, kailangan nasa level talaga siya ng institution. Hindi siya nasa level lang ng teacher. Isa pa lang yung role mo eh. You have to make sure that you work collectively so that you are able to do this in much easier way than if you have to do all of those na sinabi ko, mahirap siya. Kasi ginagawa ko siya. Lahat. Dahil ilan nga lang po kami. At mahirap yun i-demand sa lahat ng teachers. Okay lang po yun kung wala kang jowa, wala kang pamilya, wala kang anak, wala kang sariling inaalagaan. Pero hindi pa rin siya okay. Hindi pa rin pala siya okay. Pero ang point ko lang po is that you can't do it by yourself. So you have to be kind to yourself as well. To be able to provide these services to our students, we ourselves should be in the best and better position in terms of, supporting ourselves as well. So, yun po.
Thank you so much, Professor Charisse. Indeed, no? Tamang-tama po.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing any questions from the YouTube Live and the chat. Perhaps comments or something to add our experiences in our past semester as we supported our students. Probably we have something to share.
I have a
Hindi po.
question.
Sige po. Sige po.
All right. We have Professor She Rowales, please.
It's a concern that I have in advance, and also based on my experience when I did the research on online learning. I have this concern about teacher presence because I think that it's quite difficult to make students feel that I am there, and then sometimes it's not sometimes, and especially when I have discussions like forums. What I did before was I commented with all the comments of the students, and then I only just have like 5 responding to me, and I find it very difficult that I'm trying to be there, but I don't feel my students being there, and then this is one thing that I am afraid of, that my students will also feel alone in the online classroom. And as a parent myself, I saw my child crying because he said that he felt very alone as a distance learner, and this is one of my biggest concerns when I go back teaching, because I just came from study leave myself. So this is one thing that really worries me, is that I don't want my students to feel alone. And while based on my experience, I tried to make them feel that I am there, they don't respond. So most of them don't respond to discussion. So I was thinking that, is it the language that they don't like responding in English? Should I use the mother tongue? I don't know. So it's a comment, it's a concern as well.
Yeah. Valid po yung concern na yun. Honestly, I struggled with that on my first 4 years at UPOU. So I taught 9 years in UPLB, and then suddenly I shifted to online teaching. The first 4 years, it took a while before I accepted the fact that what I am used to as quote-unquote teacher presence is no longer the same teacher presence that I could expect in this kind of environment. So I think what helped me is the emphasis on shifting the form of teacher presence. Not us, not hindi na po yung they hear us, hindi na ganun yun. The definition of teacher presence is no longer they seeing us or them seeing us or them listening to us. That's no longer the teacher presence, especially kung talagang fully distance yung mode or fully online. Our teacher presence will be shifted into creating all of these materials. So the student will no longer deal with us, but with the content we prepare for them. Our teacher presence will now be converted to a material that they will read, they will interact with, they will, play with the simulation or do quizzes online. So these learning activities are the ones that they will interact with, and our teacher presence will have to be converted in that form. Ngayon, ang problema doon talaga is the feeling of loneliness or alone, the feeling of alone and isolation. Because instead of sitting with your classmate or listening to your teachers, you are just dealing with a piece of paper, with a document in your computer, things like that. And usually that social presence, so hindi na po siya teacher presence, actually social presence na yung requirement nung situation. So we hope to promote yung mga social presence. Kung hindi nag-work yung discussion forum kasi sinabi niyo po English, baka mas maging inclusive kung mother tongue nga, di ba? Pwede yun. Pero kailangan iset niyo yung guideline kasi paano kung yung isang estudyante mo ay hindi pala nakakaintindi ng mother tongue ng iba mong estudyante. So, while we hope to be more inclusive to students who are not comfortable in English, we might be excluding those who are only comfortable in English. So, mahirap po talaga siyang balansehin, sa totoo lang. Mahirap po talaga siyang balansehin. So kung hindi po nagwo-work yung discussion forum kasi 5 lang, requirement po ba yung discussion forum? Graded po ba yung discussion forum? Minsan kasi pag graded, lalo silang ayaw nilang magsagot kasi parang feeling nila, pag mali yung sinabi ko, baka ma-minusan pa ako. May ganun silang feeling eh. They are afraid of doing or committing mistakes. Yun, merong ganung fear yung ating mga students of doing wrong things that are permanently in the discussion board. Kasi hindi naman yun basta na-delete, di po ba, or na-edit. Siguro warm up, yun yung isang mahalagang mangyari, is wag agad-agad discussion forum about a certain topic. Baka kailangan mo ng socialization. Kunwari ako sa chem, ang first exercise ko na discussion forum is to translate your name. Give the chemical name of each letter of your name. So, yung Charisse, carbon, hydrogen, argon, iodine, sulfur, selenium. Tapos pipili sila. So, sasabihin nila, my name is composed of the following elements, blah, 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 blah. And then, among these, my favorite element is this and that. So, they are introducing themselves. So, one way of easing them into the discussion forum culture. Kasi hindi sila sanay. Hindi sila sanay na sinusulat nila yung reflection nila, hindi sila sanay na sinusulat yung ideas nila. So maybe we create warm-up activities at the beginning. That's one. Pero in the long run kasi talaga may makikita ka sa gitna ng semester. Parang dead na yung semester mo. Parang hindi na sila nag-interact. So it is important that we create learning activities that are varied. So a combination of different types of learning activities would definitely be helpful. For example, in the first 4 weeks, dapat isa lang yung discussion forum mo doon. Yung susunod na discussion forum doon, mga several weeks after na. In between, you have either a group project, a video recitation. Pwede din po kasing video recitation sa halip na written. So they will video capture themselves, they will post it in Moodle. Pwede din po yun. So, maraming creative juices ang mapipiga dapat pagka online learning kasi hindi sila nasisindak sa boses kasi walang boses. Hindi mo nako-call yung attention nila sa pitik at saka sa sa kindat-kindat, walang ganun. So if you really want to catch their attention or to engage them, you really have to think of mixing and matching different types of learning activities. Dapat walang monotony. Kasi baka very comfortable ka sa discussion forum all throughout the semester. Every week meron kang discussion forum, mapapagod din po sila. Talaga. Pero yung challenge po talaga yung social. Although may mga estudyante pong natutuwa na online ngayon, sa totoo lang po, yung may mga masyadong mahiyain, they prefer the current setup than going to classroom. Yeah, so yun yung tinutukoy ko kanina na you have varied and diverse student population that will come into your class. You'd be lucky if you only have one type of student, but that's rarely a possibility. So, yeah, variety. Number one, variety. Number two, easing, warming up. Tsaka baka po talagang nanibago lang talaga lahat ng tao. Nakakapanibago po talaga.
Thank you so much, Professor Charisse. We have Ma'am Minda who is raising her hand. Ma'am Minda, you are recognized po.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Ma'am Charisse, I would just like to tell you that while I am listening to you, I am also doing the survey that I have asked from our students. And what you have shared, really, what they have written here are confirmed by what you have said. Thank you so much.
Hindi ko naman po gustong i-validate kung bad man yun. kung bad man po yung experience nila. I don't wish to validate that experience. It's just something
pero I am thankful kasi nga yun ang lumabas sa survey na pinagawa ko. Because I am really wondering what's going on. And there are things that we really cannot fathom at this moment. And you are right when you said that everybody is nangangapa pa talaga. And we have to know all this really coming from our students so that we can understand them better and we can serve them better. Thank you, Ma'am Charisse.
Wala pong anuman.
Professor Charisse, meron pong question. Another. Thank you, Ma'am Minda, for your comment. And we have another question from Sir J. Ruel. Thank you po for the inputs today, Professor Reyes. My question po is that there have been any situation and experience in which the student has a very poor internet connection, so they can't attend the online class discussions. What relevant support can we provide for this?
Yeah, dyan po papasok yung learning design, yung instructional and learning design niyo. Nagiging mahalaga yung internet connection. Critical talaga siya kung synchronous po talaga yung ipipilit natin. So I think kaya kayo concerned because you have a specific schedule for a synchronous session and because one student can't have a good internet connection at that particular time. So that becomes a problem. Concern din namin yan sa UPOU. Kaya ako personally tsaka yung mga colleagues ko sa Faculty of Ed, we really resist synchronous discussion. Even synchronous examination. We try our best not to do synchronous exams. Say, if we have a final exam, we don't peg it at 9 to 12 of Saturday. Yun lang yung exam period. No. We can't do that to our students. Bakit? Pwede kasing the odds of having an internet that's unstable from 9 to 12 is very, very high in the Philippines. So usually what we do is to give them 24 hours or 48 hours to do the exam. So ako lahat ng exam ko ganun yung format. Chem yung tinuturo ko tapos yung mga exam ko ay open for 48 hours. So again, but that actually addresses the concern on internet connectivity. So my student can take the exam, say, at 2 in the morning when the internet connection is very stable across the Philippines kasi karamihan tulog. So wala siyang kalaban. Choice niya yun. Total, naka-open naman yung exam ko 48 hours. That addresses the internet connectivity. But that actually might be a concern for some when it comes to cheating and integrity of the exam. So while you are providing support, you might be compromising integrity. Yun yung ibang argument na pwede kong matanggap dun sa ganong klase ng strategy. So yung first strategy ay we are resisting synchronous sessions. Kasi nga dahil dyan. Pangalawa, the second is to give them window rather than specific hours. We give them windows to accomplish the task. However, the integrity of the exam, for example, could be questioned. Ang point ko naman doon, yung mga exam ko, kahit buksan nila yung libro, hindi nila makukuha yung sagot doon. Makukuha lang nila yung sagot pag inaral nila yung tinuro ko sa kanila the past 4 weeks. Because I create my own exams. That's one. I reuse my exams, pero kahit gumamit sila ng old exam, di pa rin nila ma-perfect yung exam ko. Ganon. So, doon papasok yung pedagogical skills and yung content knowledge mo. So, as you can see, hindi lang siya basta one skill will solve everything. While you are solving one, you might be creating problems on the other aspect. So yun yung mga dapat kong balansin. Pero kami, yung issue ng internet connection, lalo sa Pilipinas, malaking issue yan sa amin. Kaya medyo careful kami. We really don't do synchronous sessions. All our learning materials are packaged into study guides. And we give them the whole week or 2 weeks to finish one study guide. Magkita-kita tayo after 2 weeks for another study guide. I expect your output by the end of the 2-week period. Whenever you do it, you cram it, it's up to you. But I give them scaffolds kasi. So, hindi nila pwedeng i-cram yon sa dulo ng 2-week period kasi may stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. As you can see, these are pedagogical support that allows the student to manage their time, to manage their self-efficacy as well. So, these are subtle strategies that you can do to help your students navigate through these difficulties. Yeah, I hope nasagot ko po yung tanong nyo.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Charisse, for that answer. Meron po tayong tanong from the YouTube Live from Mr. Vince Jason. Ang tanong po, in relation to teacher presence, how to deal with students with a problem on responding the teacher's announcements on activities and end up failing to submit it?
Yeah. Actually, hindi ko siya i-classify as teacher presence. I-classify ko siya dun sa part ng monitoring progress. So we're providing student support such that we are able to monitor their progress. Ako personally, ang ginagawa ko talaga dyan, scaffolded assessment. So you give them small bits and pieces that will lead to a bigger project or bigger something towards the end in the summative assessment. So my formative assessments are actually gearing towards one summative assessment. Ganun yung lahat ng design ng assessments ko. So ibig sabihin, you give them small chunks. So somehow you're training them to do small tasks, and being able to accomplish small tasks gives a positive feeling to our students. So feeling accomplished kahit 5-item quiz lang yon. Pero kung na-perfect na yung 5-item quiz na yon, pihado ako, kukunin niya yung susunod kong quiz kahit 10 items yun. Gaganin po yung psychology na ina-apply ko sa kanila. So I give them small bits and pieces on the first few weeks. Small, not necessarily frequent, but a few of them that are small, and then they pile up. So at the beginning of the semester, we're teaching our students to, follow the following schedule, meet the following tasks, or submit the following assignments. You have to make them, or you have to encourage them to do the task by giving them not too heavy task in one blow. Hindi po yan mag-work. Yung sige, magtuturo ako ng lahat ng content ko sa first 3 weeks. Tapos pagdating ng week 4, assessment, one major assessment. Hindi po talaga mag-work yun. Kahit anong announcement ang gawin nyo, hindi mo sila pin-prepare towards that big assessment. So, the form of support that I give in that situation is actually giving them small pieces, bits and pieces, that will lead towards a bigger assessment. So, kung Kemya na highly quantitative, I'll give them small quizzes, 3 items, 5 items every week. Or nadadagdagan yung items kada week ng, kunwari, 3 items ngayon, next week 4 items, so susunod na week 5 items na. So they become comfortable in terms of accomplishing task kasi galing sa small steps. Papunta sa, tapos hindi na nila mararamdaman yan and they become excited towards the end. Hindi na nila naramdaman na, ang dami ko palang tinapos na quizzes all throughout. Yun po. I think that's one important aspect of it, designing your assessments.
Maraming salamat, Professor Charisse. Mr. Vince, I hope that answered your question. So medyo may delay naman sa sa broadcast. Anyway, I hope, Mr. Vince, you can comment down on the YouTube live so that we can ascertain if we are able to answer your question. All right. Professor Buwan, you have something to say?
Hi, Charisse.
Hello.
Thank you very much. So I have shared to Professor Arinto that you accepted our invitation, and actually I'm very interested on how you start from traditional face-to-face class in Los Baños, and then thinking about how to deliver online distance courses. Although yung kwento mo kanina that you are conditioned na online class na tong pinapasukan ko, it's because when you talk of content of our teachers in our laboratory school, which is Maminda is our principal for our high school, and some high school teachers are here. Before the pandemic, they really have good content, and we are not prepared of what happened when we start teaching by October, and then we're trying our best to use technology, and then actually yung technology naaaral namin parang before kasi we conducted training on our MSU-IIT learning environment, and we teach them the technology and how to combine with their content and pedagogy. But before that, they don't find it valuable to implement our online learning environment. But we haven't think about that this will happen. So the general picture is, if you talk about the content, we have that. At saka nangangapa kami sa technology, and as well as we don't know that our learners now are in different, in their homes, and some of them have low technological bandwidth, some are good, and all those things. For survival reasons, yung ginawa is every faculty merong binigay na time, yung schedule, no, na magka-class sila. And then my question is, how do we help ourselves on shifting? Parang kasi I know that every month we're starting to think about the challenges that we have encountered, and I guess all of us here in this discussion are willing to improve on how we do things. How do we help ourselves on shifting to na maabot namin yung truly flexible and inclusive classroom?
Mahirap po yung question nyo kasi may time parameter kasi. May urgency of the matter kasi, ma'am. Yun yung kinakabahan akong sagutin. Yun yung dahilan kung ba't kinakabahan pa akong sagutin. There is an element of urgency. There was also an element of urgency in my experience 8 years ago. Pero that was, all my body was really redirected 180 degrees, and I have convinced myself I'll be doing that. So I went through several trainings, and with the guidance of Prof. Arinto, she was my dean back then. She really shepherded all of us to that mindset na, yung iniisip mong chem experiment, hindi na yan pwede. Kasi nga, ganito, ganyan, ganyan, ganyan. So you have to, I had to have a paradigm shift. Talagang 180. And I had to accept the fact that I could no longer teach the way I used to. So that was the first step. It took a while, several years before I even accepted that idea fully. That I will never be teaching in the same way as I have taught for 9 years. So after that, doon na po ako nagsimula. Nag-aral po talaga ako ng theories, nag-aral ako ang dami ko pong binasa, inaral ko yung kung paano ginagawa sa ibang bansa, yung ganito, ganyan, ganyan. Tapos ang conclusion ko lang, hindi pala kami pwedeng mag-experiment. I mean, hindi ko pala, yung mga experiment na iniisip ko na magaganda, hindi pala siya ganun ka-straightforward. Na ibibigay ko sa estudyante yung procedure, bahala ka sa buhay mo. Kung may mangyari sa kanya, pananagutan ko yon. So, ako bilang teacher ng chem, whatever happens to my students in terms of safety, that's my priority. That's the number one, that's one of the things that I have to consider every time. And, if they have to perform laboratory experiments on their own, that's going to be controversial pag may mangyari kahit ba sabihing household chemicals lang yung gawin nila. So, nung nangyari yung pandemic, tinanong ako ng mga taga-chem, paano namin itatransform yung laboratory namin into online? Sabi ko, you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of your laboratory courses? Is it for teaching the skills, as in laboratory skills, or is it to support whatever theory you are teaching in the lecture? And you have to make a decision, or you have to reflect on that as an institution. I cannot dictate the purpose of the lab for your institution. Yun yung sinabi ko sa kanila. Kasi kung ang purpose ng laboratory ay, number one, if the purpose of the laboratory is to teach the skill, then there's no way you can do it via distance. You have to do it in a face-to-face manner. So, complicated yon kasi una, restricted yung mobility ng mga estudyante. Pangalawa, you have to ensure public safety. So, sabi ko, well, at the moment, if that is the goal of your laboratory is to teach the skills, you really have to ask your students to come to the lab and perform all of these techniques and experiments so that you can see whether they are able to do the skill. They can't buy their own balance. They can't buy beakers and InFLeX are less expensive, but how about the other equipment, diba? So the only place where they can do the experiment for you to assess the skill is the laboratory instructional rooms, period. Therefore, you have to wait, that's number one. So they had to delay their laboratory classes. Number two, when the time comes that the situation is much better, then you can allow your students in stages of return. So for example, this batch of student comes now. For the next week, they will be doing the experiment intensively. After 1 week, uwi sila lahat, mag-quarantine sila, yung susunod na batch naman yung tatanggapin ko. Yun yung sinadjust ko sa kanila. So, stage return of students so that physical distancing will be observed, the social distancing will be observed, there will be enough spaces for everybody, blah, blah, blah. Pero syempre, hindi pa rin yun mangyayari in the next year. Diba? So, yun po yung isang challenge. As far as I know, there's no lab classes in UP Los Baños, chemistry department. Ang ginawa ng, kung nasan ako sa Monash, di ba po, mayaman sila. So, binidyotape nila lahat ng experiments nila kasi ang goal ng laboratory nila is to support the lecture, not necessarily to teach the skill and assess the skill. So if ever there's a portion that they need to assess the skill, they only assess it on the theoretical aspect, not by hand or by performance. So they recorded all the experiments, send the video recording to their students. The students perform the laboratory report, go through the video, wrote the laboratory report, submitted the report based on data as shown in the video. And then during the assessment of lab skills, ang ginawa lang nila ay, so for example, which of the following equipment is appropriate for this experiment? Ganun lang, hanggang ganung level lang. So, pagdating po sa lab, medyo kailangan mong alamin ano ba talaga yung purpose. So, kahit po gaano kaganda yung experiment na ginawa natin, we are limited by the fact that we can't let our students come to the school. So, yeah, we have to reflect on the purpose of curricular programs that we have. So, kung laboratory yan, or itong aspeto na to, ganito, ganyan. Pero totoo po na mahirap. It's not easy to bring ourselves into that situation wherein we accept the fact that, okay, sa ngayon, hanggang dito muna tayo. Baka in the next 2 years, we can do better. Pero yun nga po, malaking impact niyan sa mga may laboratory classes. Kahit mag-simulation ka, hindi mo kasi nakukuha yung gusto mo talagang mangyari. Yun po. Pero yun, malaking bagay po yung mga simulations, yung mga scenes na available online to support the lecture if that's the purpose of your laboratory. Sometimes they are even much better than the actual laboratory experiment because at least there you can see molecules moving and colors changing more visibly, temperatures rising, etc., etc. So, yun po siguro. Nasagot ko ba yung tanong ko, ma'am? Dami kong kinwento. Sorry po. Pero yun po.
Yes, Cha. Thank you very much. Parang yung message is, it depends on the content. We need to think about yung goal ng course natin. And then how do we, in the current situation, how do we teach that important goal to our students? It really depends on the content and as well as thinking about our experience for the last semester on how do we improve ourselves. Parang ganun, no? So I guess this is really a challenging situation. Ang maganda lang doon, I guess, for all of us, I know that everyone have a good content. And then right now, we are exploring on sound pedagogy in this situation. So, yung tama yung sabi ni Cha kanina na let us be patient also of ourselves. And as well as, ang ano ko lang is yung mindset natin. That we are here as a community and we are listening to each other challenges and one thing na kaya nating gawin is let's keep improving ourselves in this kind of teaching. And thank you very much, Cha, for accepting our because yung mga speakers natin who help us on how do we improve also ourselves. Thank you, Cha, for that input.
Wala pong ano man. Basta yun lang po yung bottom line ko. If it is for any consolation, kahit po kami, I've been teaching for 8 years. Wala pa po ako dun sa stage na I can confidently say I've already transformed my pedagogy 100%. Not even my 8 years of experience with UPOU can make me, say that. So, we really have to be kind to ourselves. Kasi, hanggang dito lang eh. Matagal po siyang process. It's not something that could happen overnight.
Thank you, Ma'am Ami, for raising that question. Indeed, I think all of us naman po is striving towards improving our practice. And that's why we are conducting this training, and we are very thankful for capable speakers like Professor Charisse to share their experience as well. Meron pong comment si Sir Ace dito on the chat. regarding the ayan. Sir Ace, maybe it would be helpful if mag-share ka na lang po via audio kasi medyo masyado mataas po.
Yeah,
Ace would
good
like
afternoon to everyone. It's concern ko lang kasi to ma'am, actually Doha Qatar is practicing the UPOU, the Philippine School Doha. So right na after na yung COVID, we are obliged to enroll in OPOU, online classes. So anyways, sa ko lang to ma'am, share ko lang to kasi community nowadays, there are some students who are strolling around, and then when it comes to academe, they are so particular, they are closing schools. So why not open the possibility to open the college schools, because hygienic wise they're already capable enough to to protect themselves. Why not we suggest to CHED and DepEd, especially CHED, because we have college students. Kasi nakita natin sa mga mall, ang dami ng tao. Sa mga beaches, ang daming tao. Sa mga parties, weddings, it's funny because in the academe, they're closing it. And yet, pwede bang How about in your school, ma'am?
Kami, 1 year na kami. Ito sa Monash, 0 cases kami for several months. So within Victoria, which is one whole state here in Australia, 1 whole year na kaming walang klase. Kahit na ang cases namin ay below 5. So I think when we let students in, the accountability is now being transferred from the parents to the teachers. And it's, of course, in many cases, I'm not saying all cases, but in many cases, blame is always easier to give to the teachers. You know, when you shift the accountability of taking care or ensuring public health and safety, I think people are more careful on bringing together these students. Magkaiba kasi ng case yung pagpunta sa mall tsaka yung pagpunta sa school. Yung pagpunta sa mall, their own volition yon. If they ever contract COVID, they are liable for whatever happens to them. They themselves. Pag inalaw natin yung schooling na very erratic pa yung cases ng COVID, paano kung sa school mangyari? And the probability of that happening is, I think, not undeniable. Diba? So we cannot deny the fact that there's a huge probability of our students contracting the disease. And for every one student who contracted the disease, the extent of contracting of other students contracting the disease is exponential. So mabilis mag-spread kasi people are meeting in a confined classroom. Although sabihin na natin na yung batches, malaki talaga yung chance na nung stage return. Pero feeling ko mahirap iasa yung accountability ng lahat ng estudyanteng ito sa school administrator or sa CHED. Otherwise, sila yung mapipinalize. Parang ganun po. Parang kung nagpa-party ka tapos nagkaroon ng COVID yung lahat ng guest mo, ikaw yung may kasalanan kasi nagpa-party ka at tinanggap mo sila. Accountable ka. It's the same thing as when you feed your guest in a birthday party. If they all got stomach flu, ang liable doon ay yung caterer, di po ba? Parang ganun po yung view ko doon. So hindi ko alam kasi wala pa ako sa Pilipinas. I cannot speak for what is currently happening in the country, to which I regret na wala ako sa Pilipinas sa panahon ngayon. Hindi ko po masabi kung ano talaga yung sitwasyon ninyo. Hindi ko rin po masabi na hindi talaga pwede. Pasensya na po kayo kasi hanggang balita lang po ako kung ano talaga yung sitwasyon sa Pilipinas. Pero ang masasabi ko po, yung sitwasyon namin dito ngayon, na below 5 ang cases on a daily basis, for the longest time 0 kami. Wala talaga pong pasok. Ito lang po, anong araw ngayon? Friday, Wednesday night. Wednesday night, nagkaroon ng isang case, ang Victoria. So, after ng case na yon, kinabukasan, required na kami lahat mag-mask kahit dito sa office. Nagkataon lang po na mag-isa ako dito, wala akong kasama sa isang malaking opisina. Pwede akong hindi mag-mask. Pero pag lumabas na po ako ng door ko, I have to wear mask. That was after months of not wearing mask. After weeks of not requiring mask inside buildings. So just one case, and the whole Victoria had a massive reaction, drastic reaction, just because of a case. So hanggang ngayon po, hindi pa rin kami sure kung may face-to-face classes. Sorry, ang klase po namin ay first day of March. Yeah, 1st of March. May pasok na. So tinatanong ko nga yung mga kasama ko are we expecting students to come over and go here? Sabi nila walang assurance, not even at this point. Yun po. Medyo mahirap pong sagutin yung question. Pasensya na po kayo. Hindi ko kasi alam exactly kung ano po yung sitwasyon sa Pilipinas. So mahirap po. Yun po.
Thank
Hi,
you,
Ace.
Professor Charisse. Yes, Ma'am Ami, you have something to say.
Hello, Ace. Sagutin ko, Charisse.
Ako, sige po.
Based on admin view. So, na-mention na ni Charisse kanina. So, MSU-IIT don't want to risk. So please prepare. Wala pa rin face-to-face for MSU-IIT for this semester. Finally, yun. It's because, di ba, for the whole Philippines, nasa GCQ pa rin tayo. Isa tayo, Iligan City.
Thank you, Ma'am Ami, for making that announcement. So talagang gagawa na tayo ng InFLeX syllabus agad-agad. Again, thank you so much, Professor Charisse, for accommodating us and answering very generously our questions and queries. We are so thankful po for your presence today. And as for closing, I would like to thank everyone once again for joining us today. I hope that we gained much in today's lecture. I personally gained much, especially on the 4 pillars of student support. But before we formally close, I would like to ask our webinar participants, announce the webinar participants that the evaluation link for today's session is already in the chat and in our YouTube live comment section. So please do fill it up so that you can get your certificate of attendance for today. Another announcement would be our next session. This will be our last session for the webinar series of developing faculty peer facilitators training. But there would still be a public lecture of visiting Professor Dr. Hannah Terras on February 10, 2021. So the webinar session would be on research-based teaching by conducting effectiveness evaluations through action research. And final announcement to our training participants enrolled in our Buka Mole classroom. Please be reminded that the deadline for the submissions of expected outputs is extended on Saturday next week. That's February 13, 2021. We are looking forward to seeing your showcasing of outputs. And before we formally close, I'd like to request everyone in the Google Meet to unmute yourself and give Professor Charisse a round of applause to show our appreciation. Thank you po, Professor Charisse.
Maraming pong salamat. Thank you po. Sir, sige po.
Once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. I would like to thank the College of Education through Dean Ami Buwan for making this training possible, with the Buka team and the AVMC Tech team also here with us in the College of Education right now. Once again, thank you, and this has been your facilitator. Thank you and God bless. May we have a good weekend ahead of us. Thank you po.
Thank you.